The desert storm came fast, roaring across the plains like a wounded beast. Winds screamed through the canyons, kicking up sand that struck the earth like bullets. Lightning forked across the black sky, illuminating the desolate Arizona landscape in brief flashes of ghostly light. Somewhere between thunderclaps and the frantic cries of cattle, Colt Hargrove caught sight of something that made him stop cold. A figure stumbling through the darkness near his corral. At first, he thought it was a mirage. Out here, when storms rolled in, the land played tricks on a man's eyes. But then he saw her fall, hard, into the mud near the fence line. Without thinking, Colt threw on his oilskin coat and ran toward her, boots sinking deep into the wet sand. Rain poured down in sheets, and the wind nearly tore his hat from his head. When he reached her, he knelt and turned her over. She was a woman, young, but her face was pale as bone and streaked with dirt. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, soaked and tangled. Her breathing was shallow, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her side. Through the flash of lightning, Colt saw the blood, dark, seeping through her dress. Someone had shot her. "Hey now," he muttered, his voice rough from years of shouting over the wind and cattle. "You're all right. I got you." Her eyes flickered open, dark and frightened. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize where she was. Then she tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken whisper. Colt leaned closer and caught the words between gusts of wind. "Don't. Let them find me." Then she went limp. Colt didn't waste another second. He lifted her into his arms. She was light as a sack of grain and carried her across the muddy yard toward the ranch house. Inside, the fire in the hearth was almost out, but the air was dry and warm compared to the storm outside. He laid her gently on the cot near the fire, her soaked dress clinging to her frail frame. As he tore open the edge of her bodice to check the wound, he cursed softly. The bullet hadn't passed through. It was still inside. Not a clean shot, but deep enough to bleed her slow. He'd seen men die from worse in the war, and women die from less. Colt fetched a clean rag and his flask, dabbing at the wound with whiskey. She flinched, murmuring something under her breath that sounded like a prayer, or maybe a name. "Easy," he said, more to himself than to her. "Ain't nobody here gonna hurt you." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. He looked toward the window, half expecting to see riders coming through the rain, lawmen, bandits, or worse. Out here, anyone could be an enemy. And a woman showing up like this, bleeding and afraid, could mean nothing but trouble. Still, he couldn't turn her away. The ranch had been empty of company for too long, ever since his brother died and the war ended. Maybe that's why he stayed. Because saving her gave him a reason to care about something again. When she stirred again, her lips trembled as she whispered, "They'll kill me if they find me." Colt frowned. Who? But her eyes had already rolled back. Exhaustion took her, dragging her into a deep, uneasy sleep. He sat beside her, rubbing a hand across his jaw. Outside, lightning flashed again, and for an instant her face looked almost peaceful, like the storm had washed away everything but the truth of her fear. Colt didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what she'd done. But as thunder rolled over the plains and rain battered the roof, one thought kept turning in his mind. Whatever she was running from, it was coming his way, and by taking her in, Colt Hargrove had just made himself part of it. By the time dawn crept over the desert horizon, the storm had passed. A pale orange light stretched across the plains, revealing a world washed clean but eerily still. The air smelled of wet dust and mesquite. Inside the small ranch house, the fire had burned down to coals, and Colt Hargrove sat in his chair beside the cot, staring at the woman who'd turned his quiet night into something else entirely. She hadn't moved much since he found her. The fever had come in waves. One moment she was whispering nonsense, the next she was shivering like the dead. Colt had cleaned the wound as best he could, but the bullet was still buried deep beneath her ribs. It wasn't bleeding fast enough to kill her quick, but it would if left inside. He knew that much. Colt had half a mind to ride into town for the doctor, but that meant questions. Sheriff Langley would want names, stories, details, and Colt had none to give. Worse, the woman's words still echoed in his head. "Don't let them find me." He poured coffee into a tin cup, took a sip, and studied her. She was no outlaw he'd ever heard of. No scars, no calluses on her hands, no look of hardened cruelty. She might have been a schoolteacher or the daughter of a merchant, if not for the blood-soaked dress and the haunted look that lingered behind her eyelids. When she stirred, Colt leaned forward. Her lips parted slightly and her eyes fluttered open, dark, wild, and disoriented. "Easy now," Colt said. "You're safe here." She blinked, trying to focus on him. Where am I?" "My ranch. About 10 miles north of Dry Creek." She tried to sit up but gasped in pain, pressing a hand to her side. No, they'll come." "You shouldn't have brought me here. Who's coming?" Colt asked quietly. Her breathing quickened. She looked around the small cabin as if checking for hidden eyes. "Men, they work for him." "For Finch." The name meant nothing to Colt. He frowned. "And who's Finch?" Her gaze dropped to her lap. Her fingers trembled as she reached beneath her torn dress and drew out something Colt hadn't seen before, a small pouch made of thick canvas, stained dark with dried blood. She clutched it tightly to her chest as though it were part of her. "They can't get it," she whispered. "If they do, it's over. Everything." Colt felt the unease crawl up his spine. "What's in there?" Her eyes darted up, filled with something between fear and defiance. "You don't want to know." He hesitated. "Miss, I think I deserve to know what kind of trouble I'm keeping under my roof." She stared at him, jaw tightening. Then, after a moment, she said softly, "My name's Alara. I was a bookkeeper." "I worked for August Finch. Land baron, cattle king, murderer." The words came slow, each one carrying the weight of confession. She told him she'd discovered something. Documents Finch forged, bribes paid to government men, records of burned homesteads and false land deeds. When she tried to expose him, his men shot her and left her for dead. "That pouch," she said, "is everything I took from his office. Enough to hang him 100 times over." Colt stared at the pouch as though it were a rattlesnake. "And now he's looking to take it back." She nodded weakly. "He won't stop." "Not until I'm dead. And anyone who helps me, too." Colt ran a hand over his stubbled chin, thinking. Out here, lawmen didn't care about justice, only power. And Finch's reach stretched longer than the horizon. He stood and crossed to the window, scanning the empty plains. The storm clouds were gone, but new trouble was brewing out there. He could feel it in the stillness. Behind him, Ilara's voice cracked. "Please. If I die, don't let them have it." Colt turned, meeting her gaze. "You ain't dying. Not here." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it. Something about the way she clutched that blood-stained pouch made him realize that he'd taken in more than a wounded woman. He'd taken in a secret worth killing for. And by morning, he knew men would be riding hard to claim it. By the time dawn crept over the desert horizon, the storm had passed. A pale orange light stretched across the plains, revealing a world washed clean but eerily still. The air smelled of wet dust and mesquite. Inside the small ranch house, the fire had burned down to coals, and Colt Hargrove sat in his chair beside the cot, staring at the woman who'd turned his quiet night into something else entirely. She hadn't moved much since he found her. The fever had come in waves. One moment she was whispering nonsense, the next she was shivering like the dead. Colt had cleaned the wound as best he could, but the bullet was still buried deep beneath her ribs. It wasn't bleeding fast enough to kill her quick, but it would if left inside. He knew that much. Colt had half a mind to ride into town for the doctor, but that meant questions. Sheriff Langley would want names, stories, details, and Colt had none to give. Worse, the woman's words still echoed in his head. "Don't let them find me." He poured coffee into a tin cup, took a sip, and studied her. She was no outlaw he'd ever heard of, no scars, no calluses on her hands, no look of hardened cruelty. She might have been a schoolteacher, or the daughter of a merchant, if not for the blood-soaked dress and the haunted look that lingered behind her eyelids. When she stirred, Colt leaned forward. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes fluttered open, dark, wild, and disoriented. "Easy now," Colt said. You're safe here. She blinked, trying to focus on him. Where am I? My ranch. About 10 miles north of Dry Creek. She tried to sit up but gasped in pain, pressing a hand to her side. No, they'll come. You shouldn't have brought me here. Who's coming? Colt asked quietly. Her breathing quickened. She looked around the small cabin as if checking for hidden eyes. Men. They work for him. For Finch. The name meant nothing to Colt. He frowned. And who's Finch? Her gaze dropped to her lap. Her fingers trembled as she reached beneath her torn dress and drew out something Colt hadn't seen before. A small pouch made of thick canvas, stained dark with dried blood. She clutched it tightly to her chest as though it were part of her. They can't get it, she whispered. If they do, it's over everything. Colt felt the unease crawl up his spine. What's in there? Her eyes darted up, filled with something between fear and defiance. You don't want to know. He hesitated. Miss, I think I deserve to know what kind of trouble I'm keeping under my roof. She stared at him, jaw tightening. Then, after a moment, she said softly, My name's Alara. I was a bookkeeper. I worked for August Finch, land baron, cattle king, murderer. The words came slow, each one carrying the weight of confession. She told him she'd discovered something. Documents Finch forged, bribes paid to government men, records of burned homesteads and false land deeds. When she tried to expose him, his men shot her and left her for dead. That pouch, she said, is everything I took from his office, enough to hang him 100 times over. Colt stared at the pouch as though it were a rattlesnake. And now he's looking to take it back. She nodded weakly. He won't stop. Not until I'm dead, and anyone who helps me, too. Colt ran a hand over his stubbled chin, thinking. Out here, lawmen didn't care about justice, only power, and Finch's reach stretched longer than the horizon. He stood and crossed to the window, scanning the empty plains. The storm clouds were gone, but new trouble was brewing out there. He could feel it in the stillness. Behind him, Alara's voice cracked. Please, if I die, don't let them have it. Colt turned, meeting her gaze. You ain't dying. Not here. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it. Something about the way she clutched that blood-stained pouch made him realize that he'd taken in more than a wounded woman. He'd taken in a secret worth killing for, and by morning, he knew men would be riding hard to claim it. Night fell heavy over the plains. The stars glimmered like cold sparks scattered across a black sea, and a hush had settled around the ranch. One of those silences that comes before something terrible happens. Colt Hargrove sat at his table, cleaning his rifle in the dim lamplight, his mind running circles around what he'd learned. The woman, Alara, was no outlaw. She was a fugitive, yes, but not by choice. She carried something far more dangerous than stolen gold. Truth. Truth that could shatter a man like August Finch, the richest and most feared cattle baron in the Arizona Territory. Colt had heard Finch's name whispered before. Men who crossed him disappeared. Whole families forced off land their grandfathers had tamed. But Colt had always stayed clear of it. He wanted no part of other men's wars. He just wanted his ranch, his horses, and a quiet life that didn't demand more than he could give. Yet here he was, hiding a dying woman who carried a pouch of secrets. With killers already prowling his fence line, Alara stirred on the cot. Her skin glistened with fever sweat, her breath shallow. Colt rose, poured her a glass of water, and knelt beside her. You need to drink, he said softly. Her cracked lips parted, and she took a sip, wincing as she moved. You shouldn't help me, she murmured. You don't know what Finch does to people who cross him. I got a fair idea, Colt said. But I ain't in the habit of letting folks die on my floor. She gave a weak smile. You sound like my brother used to. Before Finch had him hanged, the words hit Colt like a hammer. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He'd seen that look before, the kind carved into soldiers' faces after losing too much. After a moment, she said, He owns everything now, the banks, the sheriff, even the judge. No one stands against him because he makes sure there's nothing left of those who try. And you took something that could stop him? Colt asked. She nodded faintly. I was his bookkeeper. I handled his land deeds, contracts, shipments. One night, I saw papers I wasn't meant to. Deeds signed by men already dead, confessions forced at gunpoint. Finch bribed government men to seize land rich with silver and water. I copied it all. Every name, every transaction. That pouch! Her trembling hand reached toward it, lying on the table beside Colt's rifle. That's his empire all on paper. If someone brave enough takes it east, to a real court, it'll hang him. Colt stared at the pouch, feeling the weight of her words. It didn't look like much, just canvas and blood, but it was heavier than gold. "Ilara," he said slowly, "you're telling me the truth will bring him down?" "It will, but only if it survives me." The way she said it made Colt's gut twist. She didn't expect to live. He looked her in the eyes. "You ain't dying yet." "Not if I can help it," she shook her head. "You don't understand. They're coming. Finch has men in every town from here to Prescott. Once they know I'm alive, they'll burn this ranch to the ground to make sure I'm not." Colt stood and paced the room. Every instinct told him to walk away, to load his horse, ride out, and leave this all behind. But another part of him, the part that still remembered honor from his war days, wouldn't let him. He turned back to her. "If I promise to keep this safe, those papers, what happens then?" She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely a whisper. "Then my death will mean something." Colt's fists clenched. "I don't like that kind of talk." She met his gaze, eyes fierce despite the fever. "You don't get to choose, Mr. Hargrove. The moment you pulled me from that storm, you made your choice." For a long while, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire and the wind scraping against the shutters. Finally, Colt stepped to the table, picked up the pouch, and tied it to his belt. Then he held out his hand. "You got my word, Ilara. No one's taken this from you." "Not while I'm breathing." She reached out, her weak fingers clasping his. "Then you've just signed your death warrant, rancher." Colt smiled grimly. Wouldn't be the first time. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the distant mountains. The night felt alive again, full of danger and promise. And as Colt doused the lamp, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't just hiding a fugitive anymore, he was part of her war. The first light of dawn broke soft and gray across the desert, but Colt Hargrove was already awake. Sleep had never come. He'd spent the night sitting by the window with his rifle in hand, watching the ridge where he'd last seen Finch's men. They hadn't returned in the dark, but he knew better than to think they'd given up. Men like that didn't retreat, they waited. Inside the cabin, Ilara stirred weakly on the cot. Her fever had dulled, but she was still pale as death, her breathing ragged. The pouch, Finch's secrets, lay hidden under a loose floorboard Colt had pried open the night before. He'd wrapped it in oilcloth, careful not to leave a trace. The silence of the morning unnerved him. No wind, no birds, no distant cattle lowing, just stillness. A desert kind of quiet that felt like someone holding their breath. Then came the sound he'd been expecting. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, coming from the north. He moved fast, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the riders. 4 this time. The man in the black duster led them again, his hat low, his horse dark as sin. They didn't bother to hide. They rode straight for the house. "Ilara," Colt said sharply, "you need to move." She blinked awake, dazed. "What?" "They're here." Fear flickered across her face, but she didn't panic. "You can't fight them all," she rasped. "I don't need to," Colt said, grabbing his saddlebag and slinging his rifle across his shoulder. "Just need to buy enough time to get you clear." She tried to stand, but pain bent her double. Colt caught her before she fell. "Easy now," he murmured, his tone gentler than his words. "You ain't dying here. You understand me?" She nodded faintly, and he helped her out the back door, keeping low. The horses were tied behind the barn. Colt boosted her up onto his mare, Dusty, then swung into the saddle behind her, one arm around her waist to steady her. As they rode out through the back pasture, the first shouts came from the front yard. "Hargrove! Come out!" Colt didn't look back. He dug his heels in, and Dusty bolted toward the open desert. Bullets cracked through the morning air, whizzing past their ears. One struck a fence post ahead of them, splintering wood. Another grazed Dusty's flank, making her rear up, but Colt held tight, urging her on. They rode hard through the mesquite and sandstone gullies until the ranch was a distant smudge on the horizon. Ilara leaned against him, weak and shivering. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "You should have left me." "They'll burn your home to the ground." "Maybe," Colt said. "But I got a habit of not letting folks die in my care." He slowed the horse once they reached the shelter of a narrow canyon, a maze of red rock and shadows. They stopped near a trickle of water that passed for a creek, both breathing hard. Colt dismounted and helped her down. She was shaking violently now, her hand pressed tight to her side. Blood had soaked through the bandage again. Colt cursed under his breath and knelt to check the wound. "Don't," she gasped, swatting his hand away. "I can't hold it in anymore," Colt frowned. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes were wide, terrified, not with pain but with something deeper. "If it comes out, they'll all die. Do you understand? You have to bury it." "Promise me you'll bury it." He stared at her, bewildered. "Bury what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she clutched her stomach and cried out, a raw, desperate sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Colt grabbed his knife, ready to cut the wound open if the bullet had shifted, but something stopped him. The look in her eyes, pure terror. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of what was inside her. Before Colt could ask more, he heard the distant echo of horses again, closer this time. Finch's men had found their trail. He packed the saddle in haste, glancing back at her. She was barely conscious, blood staining her dress anew. Whatever secret she carried, it wasn't just paper in a pouch. It was something far worse. As the sun climbed higher, Colt realized he wasn't just running from men anymore. He was running from something he didn't yet understand, something Ilara had hidden in her very flesh. And if her words were true, letting it out could doom them all. The canyon lay silent beneath the noonday sun, a maze of red stone and dust where even the wind seemed afraid to whisper. Colt Hargrove led his horse deeper between the rocks, half dragging, half guiding Ilara, who stumbled beside him. Her face was ghost pale, streaked with sweat and blood, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The fever had her again, but this time it was worse. Her skin burned to the touch, and every step looked like it might be her last. They reached a small hollow in the rock where the shadows clung thick and cool. Colt helped her sit, then knelt to fill his canteen from a thin trickle of muddy water. He forced himself to stay calm, but unease twisted in his chest like barbed wire. Ilara wasn't just wounded. Something inside her was fighting to get out. He turned to her, his voice steady but urgent. "Ilara, listen to me. If that bullet's still in there, I gotta take it out now or you won't make it through the hour." Her eyes snapped open, fever-bright and terrified. "No," she whispered. "You can't. You mustn't touch it." "Why the hell not?" Colt barked, his patience finally breaking. "You're bleeding to death, woman!" She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so weak. "Promise me," she said, her voice trembling. "If I die, you burn it. Don't bury it. Don't open it. Just burn everything." He stared at her, confusion and dread fighting in his mind. "What are you talking about?" "Burn what?" Her lips quivered. "You'll see." And then she doubled over, screaming. The sound tore through the canyon, raw and desperate. Colt dropped his canteen and caught her as she thrashed, clutching her abdomen. Her blood-soaked dress darkened further, and when he pulled it back, what he saw made his stomach twist. The wound had split open. Not from the outside, but from pressure within, as if something beneath her skin was pushing outward. God Almighty. Colt breathed. Something glistened in the wound, a thin, glassy shape reflecting the light. "Not metal, not bone, glass, Ilara," he whispered, horrified. "What did you do?" Her voice came out in gasps. "They used me. To carry it. Carry what?" Her eyes filled with tears. "A vial, a weapon. They couldn't risk it being found, so they—" She broke off, choking on pain. "They stitched it into me. Said it was safer than hiding it in a saddlebag. If they caught me, they'd cut it out and take it back." Colt reeled, his mind struggling to keep up. "A weapon?" She nodded weakly. "A toxin. Something stolen from the army. Finch wanted to use it. Poison wells, drive people off their land. But I took it before they could. I tried to destroy it. But I couldn't, so I hit it the only way I could. Her body convulsed again. Colt tore his knife free, desperate now, and cut through the torn bandage. He reached into the wound, then froze. His fingers brushed against something slick and cold. He pulled it free. It was a small glass vial, sealed with wax, smeared with her blood. Inside, something dark and sluggish moved, like smoke trapped in liquid. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. Colt dropped it instantly, heart pounding. "Good Lord," he whispered. "What have they made you carry?" Ilara slumped against the stone, her voice barely a whisper. "It's death, Colt, that's what it is. You have to burn it. Promise me." He stared at her, hands shaking, the vial glinting wickedly in the sunlight. He didn't know whether to destroy it or bury it deep where no one would find it. But before he could decide, a faint echo drifted through the canyon. Hooves, Finch's men. They'd found him. Ilara's eyes fluttered open, wide with panic. "They can't have it. Do you hear me?" "They can't." Colt snatched the vial, wrapping it in cloth, and shoved it deep into his coat. He grabbed his rifle, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Ilara," he said, meeting her gaze, "you hang on. I'll end this." But deep down, he knew it was already too late. Whatever horror Finch had created was out now, in his hands, and the line between saving Ilara and saving everyone else had just become the same deadly choice. The echo of hoofbeats grew louder, bouncing off the canyon walls like thunder. Colt crouched low, gripping his rifle tight, eyes flicking between the approaching sound and Ilara, who was barely conscious now. Her breathing had turned shallow, her skin pale as ash. He could see her fighting to stay awake, whispering something under her breath that he couldn't make out. He leaned closer. "What are you saying, Ilara?" Her cracked lips moved again. "Don't let them take it." "Promise me, Colt," he swallowed hard. "I already did." But the promise weighed heavy. He could feel the glass vial pressing against his chest inside his coat pocket, its strange warmth seeping through the fabric, as if the thing inside it was breathing. Every instinct screamed to smash it against the rock and be done with it. But he'd seen what it did to her flesh, how it seemed alive, how the color inside shifted like a storm. He didn't dare. A voice broke through the wind. "Hargrove, I know you're down there." It was Finch. Colt's blood ran cold. The man's tone was calm, casual even, but beneath it was that quiet malice only killers carried. "Step out now," Finch called again, "and I might let the lady live." Colt's jaw tightened. He peeked around the boulder and saw them, 5 men on horseback, Finch in the middle, his black coat fluttering like a vulture's wings. They were fanned out, rifles ready. There was no way he could outgun them. He turned back to Ilara. "You gotta stay quiet, you hear me? No matter what happens." Her hand caught his wrist weakly. "Don't give it to him. If he opens it..." "I know." He slid his rifle against the rock, took one deep breath, and stood up. Dust clung to his sweat-soaked shirt as he raised his hands. "Easy, Finch," he called. "Ain't no need for guns." Finch's grin widened. "Now that's the Colt Hargrove I remember, always reasonable when he's cornered. What do you want?" Finch tilted his head. "You already know what I want, the girl. And what she's carrying." Colt's eyes narrowed. "She ain't carrying nothing anymore." Finch's grin faltered just slightly. "Then I reckon you are." The air between them thickened. Finch dismounted slowly, boots crunching on gravel. "You don't know what you're holding, Hargrove. That thing in your pocket could change everything. The Army'll pay a fortune for it, and so will half the men west of the Pecos." Colt spat in the dust. "You mean kill a fortune of folks, don't you?" Finch's smile returned. "What's a few to save the many?" Colt's voice was low, dangerous. "You don't believe that any more than I do." They stared at each other, 2 old ghosts from the same war, both marked by what they'd seen. The difference was, Colt still had a soul left to lose. Finch took another step forward, his revolver loose at his side. "Give it to me and I'll let her go." Colt's pulse pounded. He looked down at Ilara again, slumped against the rock, her eyes half open. She met his gaze and mouthed one word: "Burn." And in that moment, Colt made his choice. He drew his revolver, not to shoot Finch, but to aim at the small campfire smoldering behind him. He pulled the vial from his coat and held it up, its dark contents swirling like ink in a storm. "Back off, Finch," Colt warned. "One spark and this thing burns, along with all of us." Finch's eyes widened. For the first time, fear flickered in them. "You wouldn't. Try me." The men hesitated, watching, unsure if he meant it. The canyon went dead quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Colt's arm trembled. The vial seemed to hum, pulsing in his grip like it wanted to break. Finch sneered. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Colt said, voice steady now. "But I've been dead inside a long time, Finch. You sure you want to find out how far I'll go?" The standoff stretched like a drawn wire, until suddenly a gunshot split the silence. Colt spun, the vial slipping from his fingers. Ilara had fired. One of Finch's men fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The shot shattered the fragile piece, and in the chaos the vial hit the ground. It didn't break, but it glowed. A dark, pulsing light began to spill across the rocks. The air filled with a strange hum, deep and unnatural, like the sound of thunder underwater. Colt froze. Finch's men stared, horrified. Whatever was inside the vial. It had awakened, and Colt realized with dread his choice had only begun to matter. The real horror was about to start. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Every man in the canyon stood still, eyes wide, guns forgotten, as the vial pulsed on the ground like a living heart. Its dark liquid glowed from within, swirling in shades of crimson and violet that didn't belong to the world. The glass gave off a low hum, a vibration that crawled into the bones and made teeth ache. Colt's first instinct was to crush it beneath his boot and end whatever nightmare he'd unleashed. But something deep inside him screamed not to move. The air around it shimmered, bending light the way heat does above a desert road. Dust lifted from the ground, swirling in tiny spirals toward the vial. Then it cracked. The sound was soft, almost delicate. But what came next was anything but. A hiss escaped, low and wet, followed by a cloud of black vapor that coiled upward like smoke, but moved with purpose. It spread outward, swirling fast, tendrils snaking through the canyon air. When it touched the first of Finch's men, the effect was instant. He screamed, his skin blistered, turning gray, then black. His eyes bulged as his veins darkened, crawling across his face like ink beneath glass. He staggered backward, dropped his rifle, and collapsed, dead before his body hit the dust. "Sweet Mother of God," Colt whispered. Finch stumbled back, terror flashing across his face. "What did you do, Hargrove?" Colt shook his head. "It ain't me, Finch. It's that thing you brought into this world." The black mist spread faster now, alive with hunger. It didn't drift like gas. It chased, sliding along the ground, lashing out at anything that moved. Horses reared and screamed, trying to flee, their eyes rolling white with panic. Men fired wildly into the air as if bullets could kill the wind. "Ilara!" Colt dropped to his knees beside her. "We gotta move!" She tried to speak, but could barely lift her head. "It's reacting to heat, to blood." "Then we're in trouble," Colt said, dragging her toward his horse. He slung her across the saddle and slapped the reins, sending the animal bolting toward higher ground. The canyon echoed with chaos, gunfire, screams, and the unholy hiss of the spreading vapor. Behind them, Finch shouted, "Stop him! He's got to know how to seal it." But Colt wasn't thinking about sealing anything. He was thinking about surviving. They raced through the twisting canyon paths, the dark mist rolling after them like a storm tide. Colt could feel it on his neck, cold as death. The horse stumbled once, almost falling, before regaining its footing. Ilara's faint voice came from behind him, weak but urgent. "It's alive, Colt. Not a gas. It's a living weapon." "What the hell does that mean?" "Something the Army made. From plague strains, and something worse. They said it could think. That it feeds," Colt cursed under his breath. "You brought it too far, Ilara. There ain't no way to stop that thing now." "There is," she said softly. "But it'll cost you everything." He looked back. The mist was closer than ever, swallowing the canyon like night itself. He could see Finch and his men vanishing into it, their screams cut short one by one. The ground began to rot where it touched, the plants turning black, the rocks cracking with a strange frost. "Ilara!" he shouted over the wind. "Tell me what to do!" Her head dropped against his shoulder. "Burn it all. The canyon. Everything. Fire is the only thing it fears." Colt's jaw clenched. Fire. He knew what that meant. He'd have to light the oil cache back at the old mine, where the canyon walls would trap the flames. It would kill the thing, and him along with it. The horse broke out onto a ridge. Colt looked down and saw the black mist spilling into the valley below, spreading like spilled ink across the earth. He took one long breath. "All right," he muttered. "If this is how it ends..." He turned the horse back toward the canyon, toward the mine. Behind him, the sun began to sink, painting the world red. Ahead, the darkness grew thicker, alive. Watching, waiting, and as Colt rode straight into it, rifle strapped across his back and the ghost of Ilara's plea echoing in his mind. He knew one thing for certain. The West had seen its share of monsters, but none like this, not born from hate. Not born from greed, born from man's need to play God, and now it had come to collect its due. The wind howled through the broken cliffs as Colt Hargrove rode back toward the canyon, his horse streaked with sweat and foam. The sun was setting fast, bleeding red across the horizon, and the shadows it cast made the world look half dead already. Behind him, the black mist rolled over the desert like a living storm, devouring everything it touched, trees, stones, men. It crept with purpose, as if it could smell him. On the saddle in front of him, Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness, her body limp against his chest. The fever had taken her, but she still managed to whisper, "Colt." "The mine. It's full of oil drums. Light it and run." He didn't answer. He knew there wouldn't be time to run. As they rounded the final bend, the old Able mine came into view, a jagged wound in the earth, its rusted tracks and broken carts stretching toward the mouth of the cavern. Colt slid off the horse and carried Ilara inside, laying her gently near a cluster of barrels stacked along the wall. The air smelled of crude oil and old fire, a sharp metallic stench that burned the throat. He crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You hang on, you hear? I'll finish this." Her eyes fluttered open, weak but determined. "You don't have to die with it," Colt smiled faintly. "Someone's got to make sure it burns all the way." Before she could protest, a sound echoed through the canyon, hoofbeats fast and angry. Colt turned toward the entrance and saw torchlight flickering. Finch was coming, dragging his fear behind him like a shadow that refused to die. Moments later, Finch appeared at the mouth of the mine, his black coat torn, his face streaked with soot. The last of his men were gone. His revolver was drawn, but his hands trembled. "You stupid son of a gun!" Finch spat, voice cracking. "You don't even know what you're destroying. That thing was worth more than gold, worth more than all of us." Colt stepped forward, rifle leveled. "Ain't worth one good life. Ain't worth hers," Finch sneered. "You're a damn fool, Hargrove. The army would have made you rich. You could have walked away from all this." Colt's finger tightened on the trigger. "I already walked away once. Left too many graves behind? Not this time." Finch's eyes flicked past him to the oil drums. Understanding dawned, and then panic. "You're gonna burn it? You'll kill us all!" "That's the idea." Before Finch could shoot, Colt fired first. The shot hit Finch square in the chest, spinning him backward. His torch dropped, rolling across the dirt, and landed in a slick of oil. The flames spread instantly. Colt barely had time to grab Ilara and drag her toward the far side of the mine. Fire raced along the ground like lightning, catching the barrels one by one. The heat hit him like a hammer. Outside, the black mist reached the entrance, hesitated, then surged forward, only to recoil as the first explosion ripped through the cavern. The roar was deafening. A blast of fire shot out of the mine's mouth, lighting up the night sky. Colt shielded Ilara with his body as debris rained down around them. The air turned molten, every breath like swallowing knives. Through the chaos, Elara screamed, "It's burning! Colt, it's burning!" He looked up through the smoke. The black mist was thrashing, alive, fighting the fire, twisting like a wounded serpent. It clawed at the ground, trying to retreat, but the flames followed it relentlessly. One final explosion tore through the canyon, turning the night into day. The mist screamed, a sound that wasn't wind, wasn't human, but something older and crueler. Then it was gone. Silence fell. Colt staggered out of the inferno, half carrying Elara, both of them covered in soot. Behind them, the mine collapsed inward, sealing the fire beneath rock and ash. The horizon glowed orange, and smoke rose into the darkening sky like a funeral pyre. Elara coughed weakly. "Did we stop it?" Colt looked back at the canyon, what was left of it, and nodded. "For now." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Fire could kill flesh, but not always what made it. The thing they'd burned wasn't just a weapon. It was an idea, and ideas had a way of surviving. He pulled Elara close, staring at the horizon where dawn would soon rise. The West would move on. People would rebuild. But somewhere, deep in the ashes of the canyon, something still pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Waiting. And Colt Hargrove knew that one day it might wake again. The fire burned for 3 days and 3 nights. From miles away, settlers could see the black smoke rising from the canyon like a wound in the earth that refused to close. When the flames finally died, the land was scorched into silence. Nothing left but twisted metal, cracked stone, and the faint stench of oil and ash. Out of that silence, 2 figures emerged. Colt Hargrove carried Elara through the wasteland, his body broken and raw. His skin was blistered, his clothes torn, and his eyes red from smoke and grief. The world around them was a graveyard. Nothing moved, not even the wind. Yet somehow Elara was still breathing, faint and shallow, her body weakened but alive. They stopped by a dry riverbed where the ashes had drifted thick as snow. Colt laid her down gently and collapsed beside her, coughing hard. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply breathed, the sound harsh and human against a world that no longer was. At last, Elara whispered, "Did it die?" Colt stared at the horizon, where the canyon still smoldered. "It's gone. Burned so deep even hell won't find it." Elara gave a faint, bitter smile. "That's what they said the first time." He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean, the first time?" She turned her head, eyes glassy but clear. "That vial? It wasn't the only one, Colt. There were 3. The Army called them echo serums. I took the first before Finch could deliver it. But the others..." His heart sank. "You're telling me there's more of that devil's poison out there?" She nodded. "One was sent east, one south. Experiments. They said they could reshape survival, turn plague into control. The war made monsters out of all of us." Colt leaned back, rubbing his face with shaking hands. The fire might have ended, but the nightmare hadn't. The West was already changing, men with more greed than mercy, more science than sense. "So what now?" he asked quietly. "We go chasing ghosts till we die?" Elara closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. "No, we find the people still trying to stop them." There were others who knew what Finch was doing, scientists who refused to follow orders. "They're in hiding," he nodded slowly. "Then we'll find them. I ain't letting the world burn twice." For a long time they sat in silence, watching the sun rise over the ruins. The light turned the ash gold for a moment, as if trying to forgive what had happened there. A pair of crows circled overhead, life returning, cautious but stubborn. Elara reached for his hand. "Colt, why did you come back for me?" He thought about it. "Maybe because I seen too much die for nothing. Maybe because I figured one person worth saving was better than none." She smiled faintly. "You could have run." "I did," he said softly. "For years. Guess I was due to stop." They rested until noon, then began walking east toward the old trail that led to Fort Morrow, the place where Finch had once traded his secrets. The journey ahead would be long, and both knew they might not make it. But something had changed in Colt. He wasn't just a rancher anymore, or a man running from ghosts. He was a witness to what men could create when they lost their souls, and a protector, sworn to keep it from happening again. As the canyon disappeared behind them, a warm wind blew across the desert, scattering the ashes into the air. They rose in tiny spirals, glimmering in the sunlight before fading. Alara looked back one last time. "Do you think anyone will remember this place?" Colt adjusted his hat, eyes narrowed against the light. "They'll remember the smoke." "Maybe that's enough." They walked on, their shadows stretching long across the wasteland. Behind them, deep beneath the collapsed mine, a single ember glowed faintly in the dark, then flickered out. For now, at least, the West slept. But its sins, like its legends, never stayed buried forever. And somewhere beyond the horizon, where the land bled into the sky, a new storm was already beginning to rise.